The mess hall at Camp Pendleton fell silent when Private Marcus Webb shoved Lieutenant Eva Constantin against the wall. The sound of her tray hitting concrete echoed through the space like a gunshot. 200 Marines watched as Webb's face twisted with contempt, his hand still gripping her collar. "You don't belong here," he hissed, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "Die now before you get real Marines killed." The words hung in the air, venomous and deliberate. Eva's gray eyes remained steady, unblinking as she looked up at the man towering over her. She didn't push back, didn't raise her voice. She simply stood there, her body language so calm it seemed almost unnatural. Webb released her with a shove and walked away, his buddies clapping his shoulders. Eva bent down, gathered her tray, and walked to an empty corner of the hall. She ate alone, as she had every day for 3 weeks since arriving at this forward operating base. What Webb didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Eva Constantin had a service record buried so deep that even the base commander only had partial access. 25 years in naval special warfare. 8 deployments to places whose names would never appear in official reports. The kind of operations where success meant no one ever knew you were there, and failure meant you never came home. She'd requested this transfer, this demotion in all but name, for reasons she'd never explained to anyone. The Navy had granted it reluctantly, with the understanding that her previous life would remain classified. To these young Marines, she was just another officer, a woman in her mid-40s who moved too quietly and spoke too rarely, someone who didn't fit their image of what belonged in their world. The next morning, Eva stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside the operations center, watching the C-130's taxi on the runway. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Major Reynolds emerged from the building, his face tight with stress. "Constantin," he called. "You're up. We've got a situation in Helmand Province. Convoy ambushed, 4 wounded, position being overrun. Fast movers are engaged elsewhere. We need immediate close air support." Eva set down her coffee. "Aircraft. A-10. She's fueled and armed. You've got 12 minutes. Reynolds paused, his eyes scanning her face. "Your file says you're qualified, but it's been a while since you've flown combat missions." "You sure you're ready?" Eva's expression didn't change. "Yes, sir." She walked toward the flight line, her stride steady and purposeful. Behind her, Reynolds watched with uncertainty creasing his forehead. He'd read the parts of her file he was cleared to see. Fixed-wing qualified, rotary-wing qualified, combat decorations. But the gaps in her record bothered him, the redacted sections that suggested something far beyond standard service. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat on the tarmac like a predator at rest, its nose painted with shark teeth that gleamed in the emerging dawn light. The twin turbofan engines mounted high on the rear fuselage gave it an unmistakable silhouette, brutal and purposeful. Eva conducted her walk-around inspection with methodical precision, her hands moving over the titanium bathtub that surrounded the cockpit, checking the 7 hardpoints loaded with Maverick missiles and Hydra rockets. The GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon dominated the aircraft's center line, 30 feet of airplane built around a gun that could fire 65 armor-piercing rounds per second. She climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and ran through her pre-flight checklist with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this thousands of times. The engine spooled up with a distinctive whine. "Tower, Cobra 4-1, requesting immediate takeoff clearance." "Cobra 4-1 Tower, you're cleared for immediate departure, runway 27. Good hunting." Eva advanced the throttles and the Warthog rolled forward, picking up speed until the nose lifted and the ground fell away. She climbed to 20,000 feet, heading northeast toward Helmand Province. The early morning sun painted the Afghan mountains in shades of amber and shadow. Her radio crackled to life. "Cobra 4-1, this is Tombstone 2-6. We are danger close, taking heavy fire from multiple positions, grid November Bravo 427863. The voice was strained, punctuated by the sound of automatic weapons fire in the background. 2 KIA, 4 wounded, cannot hold position much longer. Eva's voice came through calm and precise. "Tombstone 2-6, Cobra 4-1 inbound, 12 minutes out. Need you to mark your position with smoke and identify threat locations." Cobra, we're in a depression northeast of the village, smoke going out now. Enemy positions surrounding us on three sides, buildings and tree lines. Eva pushed the throttles forward, watching her airspeed climb. The Warthog wasn't fast, but it was steady, reliable, and could survive damage that would down any other aircraft. She descended to 15,000 feet, scanning the terrain below. The village appeared as a cluster of mud brick structures surrounded by poppy fields, ribbons of smoke rising from several locations. Tombstone, Cobra 4-1 has visual on your smoke. I see multiple heat signatures in the treeline west and north of your position. She banked the aircraft, lining up for her first pass. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency across the controls, arming the Maverick missiles. The targeting pod displayed thermal images of enemy fighters moving between buildings, at least 30 combatants with heavy weapons. Eva selected her first target, a technical truck with a mounted machine gun tearing into the Marine position. Tombstone, danger close, heads down. She pressed the trigger, and the Maverick leapt from the rail with a burst of smoke and flame. The missile streaked downward, its guidance system locked onto the heat signature. 2 seconds later, the technical erupted in a ball of fire that sent debris spiraling into the air. Eva didn't wait to observe the impact. She rolled the aircraft, bringing the nose around for a gun run on the tree line. The GAU-8 roared to life, a sound like tearing canvas amplified 1,000 times. 30mm rounds chewed through the vegetation at 70 rounds per second, each projectile a depleted uranium penetrator capable of destroying armored vehicles. Dust and vegetation exploded upward where the rounds impacted. Good hits, Tombstone's voice crackled. Enemy breaking contact on the west side. Eva pulled up and climbed, already scanning for her next target. Years of training and experience guided her movements, the aircraft responding to her inputs like an extension of her own body. She spotted movement in a compound north of the village, fighters repositioning with what looked like an RPG team. Tombstone, second target, compound north of the village, enemy preparing indirect fire on your position. She rolled inverted and dove, lining up the shot. The Hydra rockets rippled from their pods in pairs, their white smoke trails crisscrossing through the morning air. The compound disappeared in a series of explosions that shook the ground visible even from Eva's altitude. But the enemy wasn't retreating. More fighters emerged from buildings Eva hadn't yet identified, at least a dozen moving to flank the Marine position from the east. This wasn't a random ambush. This was a prepared defensive position, suggesting the Marines had stumbled into something much larger than anticipated. Eva keyed her radio. Tombstone, Cobra 4-1, you've got reinforcements moving to flank you from the east. I'm engaging now, but you need to prepare for company-sized element. Request additional air support. Cobra, negative on additional support. You're all we've got. The reality settled over the situation like a weight. Eva was the only thing standing between these Marines and being overrun. She brought the Warthog around in a tight turn, feeling the G-forces press her into the seat. The eastern flank showed at least 20 fighters moving through an irrigation ditch, using the terrain for cover as they advanced on the Marine position. Eva lined up for another gun run, but warning lights flashed across her instrument panel. Threat warning receiver, multiple radar locks. Cobra 4-1 taking fire, I've got SAM tracking. She threw the aircraft into a hard brake, dispensing chaff and flares as she jinked left then right. A surface-to-air missile streaked past her canopy, close enough that she could see the white trail of its motor. The explosion as the missile detonated buffeted the aircraft. Eva kept flying, kept maneuvering, her mind processing threats and responses faster than conscious thought. Another SAM launch from a different position. The enemy had brought serious anti-aircraft capabilities. This changed everything. Flying low and slow in the Warthog had been sustainable when facing small arms fire. Against radar-guided missiles, every pass became potentially fatal. Eva climbed to 18,000 feet, temporarily out of range of the shoulder-fired systems. Her mind raced through options. The Marines below didn't have 18 minutes for her to fly back and coordinate with command. They didn't have 8 minutes. The enemy was closing on their position right now. She checked her remaining ordnance. 4 Mavericks, 2 rocket pods still loaded, and a full magazine for the GAU-8. Enough to make a difference if she could get it on target. But every run would mean flying through a gauntlet of missiles and heavy machine gun fire. She thought about Marcus Webb's words from the day before. Die now. He'd meant it as an insult, a dismissal, but death had never frightened Eva. She'd made peace with it years ago during her first deployment, when she'd learned that fear was just another variable to account for and manage. What frightened her was failing the people depending on her. Tombstone 2-6, Cobra 4-1, I'm coming back around. Mark the closest enemy position with laser designator if you've got it. Cobra, we're taking casualties. Cannot maintain, the transmission cut off in a burst of static and gunfire. Eva's jaw tightened. She pushed the throttles forward and dove back toward the engagement area. The Warthog screamed down through the air, Eva's eyes fixed on her targeting display. The Marines had managed to get a laser designator on the eastern flank fighters. She locked a Maverick onto the designation and fired. The missile tracked true, slamming into the irrigation ditch and sending bodies and debris skyward. But return fire intensified immediately. Tracers arced up toward her aircraft, green lines of light that seemed to move in slow motion until they flashed past the canopy at supersonic speeds. Eva felt impacts shudder through the airframe. Warning lights illuminated, hydraulic pressure dropping. She rolled left, presenting less target area, and brought the gun around for another pass. The GAU-8 thundered again, its recoil actually slowing the aircraft's forward momentum. The rounds impacted in a diagonal line that cut through the enemy position like a blade. She pulled up, checking her systems. Hydraulics at 40%, right engine temperature climbing, fuel leak detected in the auxiliary tank. The aircraft was hurt but still flying. Below, Tombstone's radio came back online. Cobra 4-1, enemy pulling back on east flank, but we've got a new problem. Battalion-sized force moving up from the south, multiple vehicles, estimate 5 minutes to contact. Eva's blood ran cold. Battalion-sized meant 200 or more fighters. The Marines below numbered maybe 25, now down to 15 or 20 after casualties. This wasn't a random convoy ambush anymore. This was a trap, and the jaws were closing. She climbed back to altitude, her mind working through tactical problems. With her current ordnance and a damaged aircraft, she could hurt the approaching battalion, but she couldn't stop them. Not alone. The Marines needed extraction or reinforcement, and they needed it immediately. Eva switched to the command frequency. Warlord Maine, Cobra 4-1, troops in contact, danger close situation, enemy battalion strength approaching from south. Request immediate QRF and extract package. Grid November Bravo 427-863. Cobra 4-1, Warlord Maine, negative on QRF. Nearest ground assets are 40 minutes out. Working extract package but need 30 minutes minimum to coordinate helicopter support. Can you maintain air support? Eva looked at her fuel gauge, her weapons inventory, her damaged systems. 30 minutes, an eternity in combat. Warlord Maine, affirmative, will maintain station. She didn't mention that maintaining station would mean flying a critically damaged aircraft through concentrated anti-aircraft fire for half an hour. Eva rolled the Warthog into a wide orbit over the engagement area, her eyes constantly scanning between her instruments and the ground below. The approaching battalion was visible now as dust clouds rising from the road south of the village. Trucks, technicals, what looked like at least 3 actual armored personnel carriers. This was no insurgent group. This was an organized military force. She selected her remaining Mavericks, prioritizing the armored vehicles. The missiles would be most effective against hard targets. She'd save the rockets and cannon for the lighter vehicles and personnel. Tombstone 2-6, Cobra 4-1, I've got eyes on the approaching force. I'm going to hit their armor and try to slow their advance. You need to consolidate your position and prepare for a long defense. Cobra, understood. We're down to 12 effectives, multiple wounded. We'll hold as long as we can. The resignation in the Marine's voice cut through Eva like a knife. She'd heard that tone before in Somalia, in Iraq. in places that no longer appeared on any map she was allowed to discuss. It was the sound of men preparing to die well because survival no longer seemed possible. Tombstone, I'm not leaving, you're going home, all of you, she meant it. Eva pushed the aircraft into a dive, targeting the lead APC. Distance closed rapidly, her airspeed climbing past 300 knots. At 3,000 feet, she fired. The Maverick's motor ignited and the weapon separated cleanly, tracking toward its target. Eva pulled up hard, already maneuvering for the next attack. The APC erupted in flames, its ammunition cooking off in secondary explosions that destroyed the vehicle behind it. The convoy scattered, vehicles peeling off the road to find cover. Eva came around again, lower this time, accepting the risk because speed and violence were the only advantages she had left. She fired her second Maverick at another APC, watching the missile impact the vehicle's side armor. Metal peeled back like paper. The third APC reversed course, trying to escape, but Eva had already lined up her shot. The third Maverick tracked true, turning the armored vehicle into a fireball, but the cost of success came immediately. An SA-7 missile, launched from somewhere in the village, streaked toward her aircraft. Eva barely had time to dispense flares before the warhead detonated close enough to send shrapnel through her right engine. The right engine seized with a grinding shriek of torn metal. Eva shut it down immediately, securing the fuel and electrical systems to prevent fire. The Warthog shuddered but kept flying, its single remaining engine straining to maintain altitude. She'd trained for this scenario countless times, knew that the A-10 could fly home on one engine if necessary. But that was without battle damage, without hostile fire, without a critically low fuel state. Her options were narrowing with every passing second. Below, the enemy battalion had lost its armor but gained motivation. Hundreds of fighters dismounted and began moving toward the Marine position using every piece of cover available. Eva had maybe 10 minutes before they reached Tombstone's perimeter. She checked her remaining weapons. 2 rocket pods, full ammunition for the GAU-8. No more missiles. What she had left required close-range work, the kind where you could see faces and expressions, where the violence became personal and immediate. Eva descended to 5,000 feet, lined up on the approaching infantry. The hydraulics groaned in protest as she adjusted her angle of attack. She triggered the rocket pods, sending dozens of Hydra rockets into the massed formation. Explosions rippled across the landscape, each one throwing up geysers of dirt and stone and worse things. She followed immediately with the gun, the GAU-8 chewing through the advancing fighters with mechanical precision. The aircraft shook with each burst, and Eva felt every vibration through the stick. Return fire intensified. Heavy machine guns tracked her path, their rounds stitching lines across the desert floor before walking up toward her aircraft. She felt more impacts, heard the distinctive ping of rounds penetrating metal. A new warning light illuminated. Left hydraulic system failure. Eva switched to the backup system, knowing it wouldn't last long. She pulled up, gained 1,000 feet of altitude, and came around again. The enemy advance had stalled, fighters seeking cover from the devastation being rained down from above. But they weren't retreating. Whoever commanded this force had committed to the attack and wasn't backing down. Cobra 4-1, Tombstone 2-6, enemy reaching our wire, we're going to close combat. Eva's eyes swept the battlefield. She could see muzzle flashes from the Marine position now, the desperate last-ditch defense of men with their backs against the wall. Eva lined up for another gun run, bringing the Warthog down to 4,000 feet. The altitude was dangerous, well within range of every weapon the enemy possessed, but accuracy mattered more than safety now. She could see individual fighters, their positions, the way they moved. The GAU-8 spun up and rounds poured from the 7-barrel rotary cannon. Each burst lasted 3 seconds. Each burst expended 200 rounds of ammunition. The depleted uranium penetrators tore through anything they touched, destroying vehicles, fortifications, and human bodies with equal efficiency. The physics were brutal and absolute. But Eva wasn't just shooting. She was sculpting the battlefield, creating zones of destruction that channeled enemy movement away from the Marine position, forcing them into kill zones, disrupting their command and control through precisely applied violence. It was the kind of close air support that required not just skill but deep tactical understanding, the ability to think like both the attacker and defender simultaneously. On the ground, the Marines recognized what was happening. They shifted their fire to complement Eva's attacks, working in unconscious coordination with the aircraft above them. Enemy fighters who sought cover from the A-10's gun ran directly into Marine machine gun fire. Those who pressed forward were cut down by the next strafing run. The tide was turning, but Eva's ammunition counter was dropping towards zero. She had maybe 3 more gun runs before the GAU-8 went dry. After that, she'd be nothing but a damaged aircraft flying circles overhead, unable to help. Her radio crackled. All stations, Warlord Main, extract package inbound, 2 CH-53s with Apache escort, ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Eva checked her fuel gauge. She had maybe 20 minutes of flight time remaining, possibly less with the damaged engine running at maximum continuous power. The math was tight but workable. If she could keep the enemy suppressed for 15 more minutes, the Marines would make it out. She keyed her radio. Warlord Main, Cobra 4-1 copies, will maintain station until extract completes. Cobra 4-1, Warlord Main, be advised your aircraft is showing as critically damaged on our sensors. Do you require emergency divert? Eva looked at her instrument panel, at the red warning lights that covered more surface area than the green ones. She thought about the safe choice, the one that would ensure her survival. Eva's response was immediate and certain. Warlord Main, negative on divert, maintaining station. She rolled the aircraft into another attack run before anyone could countermand her decision. The choice had never really been a choice at all, not for her. You didn't abandon people on the ground, not while you still had fuel and ammunition, not while you could still fly. It was a principle carved so deep into her being that considering alternatives would have been like considering whether to breathe. The enemy below had learned to fear the sound of the A-10's engines. Eva saw them scatter as she approached, diving for cover before she even fired. She used that fear tactically, making dry passes over certain areas to force fighters into positions where Tombstone's guns could reach them. When she did fire, each burst counted. The GAU-8's ammunition counter ticked down. 1,500 rounds remaining. 1,200. 900. Each number represented 3 seconds of fire, 3 seconds of protection for the Marines below. Eva became aware of a new problem. Her fuel state had dropped below minimums. The leak in the auxiliary tank was worse than she'd initially calculated. She was burning fuel at a rate that meant she might not make it back to base even if she left immediately. But leaving wasn't an option. She continued her orbit, continued her attacks, burning fuel she didn't have to buy time the Marines desperately needed. On the ground, she could see enemy fighters massing for what looked like a final assault. They'd realized the aircraft above them was running low on ammunition, that the weight of fire had decreased. They were preparing to rush the Marine position before the extraction helicopters arrived. Eva recognized the tactical moment, the point where the battle would be won or lost in the next 60 seconds. She keyed her radio. Tombstone 2-6, enemy massing for assault on your north side. I'm going to make one more run with everything I have left. When I pull off, that's your window to collapse your perimeter and prepare for extract. Cobra 4-1 copy. We'll be ready. Eva checked her ammunition. 600 rounds. She'd make them count. She dove toward the enemy position, steeper than any previous run, building airspeed until the wings shook with the force. The desert floor rose up to meet Eva as she pushed the Warthog into a 40-degree dive angle, far steeper than standard procedures recommended. Her airspeed climbed past 400 knots. The aircraft groaned under the stress. At 2,000 feet, she pressed the trigger and held it. The GAU-8 roared with sustained fury, no longer firing in controlled bursts but in one continuous stream of destruction. The depleted uranium rounds impacted like a rainstorm made of metal and violence. The enemy position simply ceased to exist, replaced by a churning cloud of dust and debris. Eva held the trigger until the ammunition counter reached zero, until the gun spun down to silence. She pulled up hard, feeling the G-forces crush her into the seat, watching her altitude drop to 800 feet before the aircraft began to climb. Behind her, the enemy assault had been shattered. Bodies and equipment lay scattered across an area the size of a football field. The survivors were retreating, finally broken, finally convinced that pressing the attack would mean certain death. Eva climbed back to 3,000 feet and established an orbit over Tombstone's position. Her weapons were exhausted. All she could offer now was presence, the psychological weight of an A-10 circling overhead, the implicit threat that somehow, someway, she might still be able to hurt them. It was enough. The enemy withdrew, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead. Minutes later, Eva heard the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors. Two CH-53 Super Stallions appeared from the east, flying low and fast, flanked by a pair of Apache gunships that looked downright eager for someone to take a shot at them. The Apache took up blocking positions, while the CH-53s settled into the depression where the Marines had been fighting. Eva watched through her targeting pod as Tombstone's Marines loaded their wounded first, then their dead, then finally themselves. The whole extract took less than 4 minutes, a perfectly executed emergency evacuation. The CH-53s lifted off, banked hard, and disappeared back toward friendly territory. The Apache followed, and suddenly Eva was alone in the sky above Helmand Province. Her radio crackled. Cobra 4-1, Warlord Main, target area secure, extract complete. Say your status. Eva looked at her instruments. Single engine operation, multiple hydraulic failures, fuel at critical minimums, no ammunition, structural damage unknown but probably extensive. Eva keyed her radio, her voice steady despite the critical state of her aircraft. Warlord Main, Cobra 4-1, mission complete, all souls extracted. Aircraft is code 3, single engine, hydraulics degraded, fuel critical, requesting direct vector to nearest suitable runway. There was a pause on the other end, long enough that Eva knew they were looking at her telemetry, seeing just how bad her situation really was. Cobra 4-1, Warlord Main, copy your status. Be advised nearest suitable runway is Bagram, bearing 095, distance 140 nautical miles. Your current fuel state shows insufficient for that distance. Recommend you consider ejection and will recover the aircraft later. Eva did the math in her head. With one engine and a fuel leak, she'd be lucky to make 80 nautical miles. Bagram was impossible, but ejecting over hostile territory, even with rescue assets available, meant risk. More importantly, it meant losing the aircraft, and the A-10 was still flyable. Damaged but flyable. Warlord Main, negative on ejection. What's the nearest forward operating base with any kind of runway? Another pause, longer this time. Cobra 4-1, you've got FOB Salerno, bearing 110, distance 70 nautical miles. Runway is only 5,000 feet, not rated for A-10 operations, but it's paved. That's your only option. 5,000 feet. The A-10 needed at least 4,000 feet under ideal conditions. Eva's current conditions were about as far from ideal as possible. Landing with degraded hydraulics, potentially compromised flight controls, and whatever structural damage she'd sustained, she'd need every inch of that runway and probably a minor miracle. Warlord Main, Cobra 4-1, I'll take Salerno, requesting crash and rescue be prepositioned. Cobra 4-1, crash crews are being notified now. Godspeed. Eva turned the aircraft onto a heading for FOB Salerno and trimmed for best fuel efficiency. The Warthog settled into a steady glide, its single remaining engine running at maximum continuous power. She pulled up her moving map display and studied the terrain between her current position and the FOB. Mountains, valleys, not much in the way of emergency landing options. If the engine quit before she reached Salerno, her choices would be ejection or trying to deadstick the aircraft into a river valley and hopping for the best. Neither option appealed to her. The minutes stretched into eternity as Eva nursed the damaged aircraft across the Afghan landscape. Every vibration, every unusual sound, every flickering gauge became a potential herald of catastrophic failure. She monitored her fuel consumption obsessively, watching the numbers tick down with arithmetic certainty. At 40 nautical miles from Salerno, her fuel gauge showed 10 minutes remaining. The math didn't work. She'd fall short by at least 5 minutes of flying time, maybe more. Eva adjusted her altitude, trading height for distance, beginning a long, shallow descent that would stretch her glide range. She informed Warlord Maine of her situation, keeping her voice professional and clinical. Inside, a small, quiet part of her mind acknowledged that she might not make this landing, that the last 25 years of survival and service might end here, in this damaged aircraft over these mountains. But she wasn't afraid. Fear had been worn away over decades of close calls and narrow escapes. What remained was focus, the pure technical concentration of a pilot at the edge of her capabilities, flying an aircraft at the edge of its capabilities, betting her life on training and skill and the fundamental toughness of the machine surrounding her. At 20 nautical miles, her fuel gauge touched zero. The engine continued running, burning whatever remained in the lines and tanks. Eva spotted Fob Salerno in the distance, a small cluster of structures and a single runway carved out of the valley floor. She was too high and too far right of centerline. Normally she'd adjust with engine power, but that wasn't an option. She'd have to manage her energy state with nothing but stick and rudder, gliding the aircraft to the runway like a 30-ton paper airplane. At 5 nautical miles, the engine quit. The cockpit went suddenly quieter, the absence of engine noise eerily total. Eva's hands moved automatically, configuring the aircraft for emergency landing, trying to preserve what little hydraulic pressure remained. She pushed the nose down slightly, trading altitude for airspeed, keeping the aircraft above stall speed. At 2 nautical miles, she was lined up with the runway but still too high. She extended the landing gear manually, using the drag to bleed off altitude. The nose gear deployed, but the right main gear showed unsafe. She recycled it, felt it lock into place on the second attempt. The ground rose to meet her faster than she would have liked. Eva fought to control her descent rate with degraded hydraulics, feeling the controls mushier and less responsive with each passing second. The runway threshold passed beneath her nose. She was too fast, but that was better than too slow. The A-10 could handle a hard landing. A stall at 50 feet would kill her. She pulled back on the stick, flaring the aircraft, trying to bleed off speed before the wheels touched down. The Warthog dropped the last 20 feet like a stone. The landing gear absorbed the impact with a teeth-rattling crunch that Eva felt through her spine. She was on the runway, rolling fast, too fast. Eva stomped on the brakes. The left brake responded, the right one didn't. The aircraft began to veer right toward the edge of the runway. She released the left brake, used rudder to correct, then hit the brakes again. The left tire began to smoke. She was eating up runway at an alarming rate. 3,000 feet remaining, 2,000 feet. She stood on the brakes with both feet, feeling the pedals sink toward the floor as the hydraulic pressure bled away. 1,500 feet remaining. The aircraft was slowing but not fast enough. At the end of the runway she could see a berm, then empty desert beyond. 1,000 feet remaining. The right brake suddenly grabbed, locking the wheel. The aircraft slewed hard right. Eva compensated with rudder, but the combination of asymmetric braking and no hydraulic pressure made the aircraft almost uncontrollable. 500 feet remaining. She was going off the end of the runway. Eva made her choice. She unlocked the right brake entirely and steered the aircraft off the right side of the runway, aiming for open ground rather than the berm. The Warthog's nose dug into the sand. The aircraft spun 90 degrees and stopped, one wing low, its nose buried in the desert. The sudden stop threw Eva forward against her harness. Dust billowed up around the canopy, obscuring everything. For 3 seconds, Eva sat in the cockpit, breathing hard, running through her post-crash checklist automatically. Engine off, check. Electrical off, check. Fuel off, check. Fire suppression armed, check. Then she popped the canopy and climbed out, moving quickly in case fire broke out. She jumped down to the ground and walked 20 meters away before turning to look at the aircraft. The A-10 sat at an awkward angle, nose down, right wing drooping. Its landing gear splayed out like the legs of a wounded animal. Battle damage was visible across the entire airframe, punctures from small arms fire, shrapnel scoring along the fuselage, One elevator surface partially torn away, hydraulic fluid pooling beneath the wings. Eva counted at least 40 distinct impact points, any one of which might have been fatal to a less robust aircraft. Fire trucks and ambulances raced across the desert toward her. Eva waved them off, indicating she was uninjured. The emergency crews surrounded the aircraft anyway, spraying foam on the hot engine, checking for fuel leaks, preparing for the fire that never came. A Humvee pulled up beside Eva. Major Reynolds stepped out, his face a mixture of relief and something else, shock perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. Lieutenant Constantine, hell of a piece of flying. Eva nodded, still catching her breath. Thank you, sir. Reynolds looked at the destroyed aircraft, then back at Eva. I've been reading your file, the parts I'm cleared to see anyway. DEVGRU, isn't it? The Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Eva's expression didn't change, but her silence was confirmation enough. Reynolds continued. I made some calls while you were in the air, talked to some people who know people. They told me things I probably shouldn't know. He paused, choosing his words carefully. They told me you've got more combat hours than most pilots accumulate in a career, that you've done things in places we're not supposed to know about, that you could have stayed in that world, kept doing that work, but you requested transfer to a regular unit. Eva met his eyes. That's correct, sir. Why? It was the question Eva had been avoiding for 3 months, the one she'd never adequately answered for herself. She looked at the mountains surrounding the FOB, at the Marines gathering at a distance to see the pilot who'd saved Tombstone's lives. Because that world got too heavy, she said finally. Because I needed to remember what we're fighting for, not just what we're fighting against. Because I wanted to be part of something visible again, something where the people you save know you saved them. Reynolds nodded slowly. The men you brought home today, they're going to want to thank you. Eva shook her head. That's not necessary, sir. But Reynolds was already waving over a group of Marines who'd been standing at a respectful distance. They approached slowly, uncertainly. Eva recognized several of them from the mess hall, witnesses to her confrontation with Marcus Webb. At the front of the group was a younger Marine, his uniform still dusty and bloodstained, his left arm in a makeshift sling. He stopped in front of Eva and came to attention, saluting despite his injuries. Lieutenant Constantine, I'm Corporal Rodriguez, Tombstone 26. I was the forward air controller you were working with. Eva returned the salute. Good work on those laser designations, Corporal, made my job easier. Rodriguez shook his head, emotion raw on his face. Ma'am, you saved our lives. We were done. We'd written our last letters, and then you came out of the sky like. His voice caught. He swallowed hard and tried again. We owe you everything. The other Marines murmured agreement. Eva saw faces she recognized, men who'd laughed when Webb shoved her against the wall, who treated her like an unwelcome intruder into their world. Those faces looked different now. Something had shifted, some fundamental recalculation had occurred. Eva spoke quietly but clearly. You don't owe me anything. This is the job. It's what we do. A voice came from the back of the group. Lieutenant, Marcus Webb pushed through the other Marines. His face was pale, his hands clenched at his sides. He stopped 2 paces from Eva and stood there, clearly struggling with what to say. Eva waited, giving him time. Webb finally met her eyes. I was wrong. What I said, what I did, there's no excuse. The words came out rough, forced through shame and pride fighting each other. I judged you without knowing a damn thing about you. I thought. He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong. Eva studied him for a long moment. She could destroy him right now if she wanted, could file charges, could make his apology insufficient. But that had never been her goal. Apology accepted, Private Webb. Relief flooded Webb's face. Thank you, ma'am. Eva turned to address the gathered Marines. Listen to me, all of you. What happened today isn't about me proving anything. It's not about earning anyone's respect. It's about the job we all volunteered to do. She paused, making eye contact with each of them. Every person wearing this uniform has a story. Most of those stories you'll never know. Some of the people you work with have done things you can't imagine in places you'll never hear about. The quiet ones, the ones who don't fit your image of what a warrior looks like, sometimes those are the ones who have seen the most, done the most, sacrificed the most. The Marines listened in absolute silence. Eva continued. You want to honor what happened today. Stop judging your brothers and sisters in uniform by their appearance, their gender, their age, or how well they fit your preconceptions. Start trusting that the people around you earned the right to be here, same as you did. Start believing that everyone's fighting their own battles, carrying their own weight, even if you can't see it. She gestured at the destroyed aircraft behind her. That airplane is going to be salvaged for parts. It'll never fly again, but it did its job. It brought your brothers home, that's all that matters, not what it looked like. Not whether it matched someone's idea of what an attack aircraft should be. Just that when it mattered, it showed up and did the work. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it landed. Eva saw understanding ripple through the group. Major Reynolds cleared his throat. Dismissed. Get yourselves to medical, get cleaned up, and get some rest. Constantine, you too. Medical eval is mandatory. The Marines dispersed slowly, reluctantly, glancing back at Eva like they wanted to say more but didn't have the words. Only Webb lingered. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Eva nodded. Webb hesitated, then forged ahead. The call sign on your aircraft, Cobra 41. Is that a temporary assignment? It is. Cobra isn't my actual call sign. Webb's curiosity was obvious. What is your actual call sign, ma'am? Eva hadn't used it in 2 years, hadn't spoken it aloud since her last mission with DEVGRU. But something about this moment, this place, made it feel right. Reaper. The word hung in the desert air. Webb's eyes widened slightly as the implication sank in. Reaper wasn't a call sign you got for being good at your job. It was the kind of call sign that came from consistent, devastating effectiveness, from being the one the enemy feared most, from a body of work that spoke for itself. That's what they called you, Webb asked quietly. Eva nodded once. Webb absorbed this, his entire understanding of the world realigning. The woman he'd shoved against a wall 3 weeks ago, the person he'd told to die now before she got real Marines killed, had been one of the most lethal combat pilots in naval special warfare, had been conducting operations while he was still in middle school, had more confirmed kills than he would probably see targets in his entire career. Jesus, he whispered. Then louder, ma'am, I need to apologize again. I need you to understand. Eva cut him off. Webb, I told you. Apology accepted. Learn from it and move on, that's all I ask. She turned to walk toward the medical tent, exhaustion suddenly catching up with her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the mission was draining away, leaving behind the accumulated fatigue of 4 hours of intense combat flying, the crash landing, and the emotional weight of nearly dying. Major Reynolds fell into step beside her. Reaper, he said quietly. I've heard that call sign before, stories. Never knew if they were real. Most stories aren't, Eva said. Most of what people hear is exaggerated, embellished, turned into legend. But some of it's real. Eva didn't answer. They walked in silence for a few paces. Reynolds tried again. The file I managed to see mentioned deployments to Yemen, Somalia, Syria, places that officially were not conducting operations. It mentioned a mission in Raqqa in 2017. Something about extracting a downed pilot from behind enemy lines using a helicopter that had no business being able to fly in those conditions. Eva remembered that mission. Remembered the .50 caliber round that had torn through the helicopter's tail rotor, the emergency landing in an ISIS-controlled neighborhood, the running gun battle through city streets, the dying pilot she'd carried on her back for 3 miles. Remembered the citation for valor that she'd never been allowed to accept in public. That pilot made it home, Eva said simply. That's what matters. They reached the medical tent. Reynolds stopped at the entrance. Lieutenant, I need to tell you something. What you did today, it's going to generate attention. Reports will be filed. People are going to want to know who you are, what your background is. The classified parts of your record may not stay classified. Eva had expected this. The moment she decided to fly that damaged aircraft into combat instead of ejecting safely, she'd known there would be consequences beyond the immediate tactical situation. I understand, sir. Reynolds studied her face. Does that bother you, having your previous service become known? Eva considered the question. For 2 years, she'd operated in the shadows, her name appearing in documents that would never see public release, her face unknown except to the small community of special operations personnel who shared her world. Anonymity had been not just a security requirement but a psychological necessity. When you did the kind of work she'd done, invisibility was armor against the weight of it all. But maybe that armor had also been a prison. Maybe that was why she'd requested the transfer, why she'd chosen to return to the visible world where actions had witnesses and consequences were immediate rather than hidden. "No, sir," Eva said finally. "It doesn't bother me." She went into the medical tent. The flight surgeon examined her systematically, checking for concussion, spinal injuries, internal bleeding. Eva endured the poking and prodding with patience. She'd been through this ritual after dozens of rough landings and close calls. The surgeon pronounced her miraculously uninjured, prescribed rest and observation, and tried to insist she stay overnight for monitoring. Eva politely declined. She had reports to write, statements to give, the tedious administrative follow-up that came after any significant combat engagement. The surgeon reluctantly released her with strict instructions to return if she experienced any symptoms of delayed trauma. Eva found an empty office in the operations building and sat down to write her after-action report. The words came slowly at first, then faster as she fell into the familiar rhythm of military documentation. She described the mission chronologically, clinically, focusing on tactical details and avoiding emotional reflection. Time on station, ordnance expended, enemy casualties estimated, friendly casualties prevented. The report ran to 14 pages by the time she finished. Eva submitted her report electronically and finally allowed herself to sleep. She found an empty bunk in the transient quarters, set her phone alarm for 4 hours, and was unconscious within minutes. She dreamed, as she often did, of flying. In the dream, she was back in the A-10, but the aircraft was pristine and undamaged. The sky was impossibly blue, empty of threats, peaceful. She flew for hours, alone, the engine humming smoothly behind her. It was the kind of flying she'd loved before combat had turned flight into violence, before every mission meant destroying something or someone. She woke to shouting outside the building. Eva sat up, instincts immediately alert, listening for the pattern of the noise. Not alarm or emergency, just excitement. She checked her phone. She'd slept for 6 hours instead of 4. The sun was setting outside, painting the fob in long shadows. Eva stepped outside. A crowd had gathered near the flight line. She walked toward it, curious. Major Reynolds spotted her and waved her over. "Constantine, you need to see this." The crowd parted. On the concrete apron sat a C-17 Globemaster III, its massive cargo ramp lowered. Ground crew were offloading something, maneuvering carefully. Eva recognized the shape immediately. An A-10 Thunderbolt II, this one bearing different tail markings than her previous aircraft. Fresh paint, no battle damage. Reynolds grinned at her expression. "Someone at command decided you need a replacement aircraft. This one just got transferred from Kandahar. It's yours now." Eva walked toward the aircraft, hardly believing what she was seeing. The A-10 was fully armed, loaded with a complete combat package. Someone had gone to considerable effort to get this aircraft here within hours of her previous one being destroyed. On the nose, beneath the cockpit, fresh paint spelled out a new designation, not Cobra 41. The letters read, Reaper. Eva stopped, staring at the call sign now permanently marked on the aircraft. Reynolds appeared at her shoulder. Word travels fast in special operations circles. Once your real identity started making the rounds, some people decided you should be flying under your proper call sign. He paused, then added, "There's a briefing in 30 minutes. Apparently, command has decided your particular skill set should be utilized more formally." The briefing room was crowded with officers Eva didn't recognize, faces from various commands and specialties. She took a seat near the back and waited. Major Reynolds stood at the front beside a colonel Eva vaguely recognized from CENTCOM staff. The colonel called the room to attention. "Be seated. This briefing is classified secret. No recording devices, no notes leave this room." He gestured at a map of Afghanistan projected on the screen behind him. What happened yesterday at Grid November Bravo 427863 wasn't a random convoy ambush. Intelligence suggests it was a deliberate attempt to draw out and destroy a reinforced Marine platoon. The enemy force was waiting specifically for that convoy, with prepared positions and anti-aircraft assets pre-positioned. The colonel changed the slide, showing satellite imagery of the engagement area. Eva could see the destroyed vehicles, the scorched earth where her ordnance had impacted. Thanks to Lieutenant Constantine's actions, the ambush failed. But this engagement revealed something significant. The enemy is becoming more sophisticated, more organized. They're starting to use combined arms tactics, integrating air defense with ground forces in ways we haven't seen from insurgent groups before. Another slide appeared, this one showing a photo of a man Eva didn't recognize. Middle-aged, hard-faced, wearing combat fatigues. This is Khalid Nazari, formerly a colonel in the Afghan National Army, currently leading an insurgent cell operating in Helmand Province. Intelligence believes he's responsible for training and organizing the force that engaged Tombstone yesterday. He's turning guerrilla fighters into something that resembles a conventional military unit. The colonel looked directly at Eva. Lieutenant Constantine, your previous experience in direct action missions makes you uniquely qualified for what we're proposing. We want to establish a dedicated close air support team, operating outside normal command structures, focused specifically on countering Nazari's group and similar threats. You'd have considerable autonomy, choice of missions, access to intelligence assets most conventional units don't get. Eva listened, understanding immediately what was being offered. They wanted her to go back to the shadows, to operate in the gray areas where special operations lived. It was familiar territory, the kind of work she knew better than anything. The colonel continued, you'd still maintain your current rank and status, but you'd be operating under special tasking authority. Essentially, you'd be doing what you did yesterday, but systematically as part of a coordinated campaign against high-value targets. Eva raised her hand. Sir, permission to speak? Granted. Eva chose her words carefully. Sir, I requested transfer out of special operations for a reason. I needed to step back from that world. What you're describing sounds like exactly what I was trying to leave behind. The colonel nodded slowly. I understand. Your service record shows continuous deployments for over a decade, no breaks longer than 60 days, operating at a tempo that would break most people. You earned the right to step away. He paused, then continued. But circumstances have changed. The enemy is evolving. We need people with your capabilities, your experience. I'm not ordering you to accept this assignment. I'm asking. The room fell silent. Eva felt the weight of expectation, the pressure to say yes, to go back to being Reaper full-time. But she also felt something else, a small voice in the back of her mind asking whether she'd truly left that world or just paused temporarily, whether she could ever really leave. She thought about Tombstone's Marines, about Rodriguez and Webb, and the others whose names she hadn't learned but whose faces she'd remember forever. She thought about the satisfaction of bringing them home, of using her skills for something immediate and tangible. She thought about the sitting on the flight line with Reaper painted on its nose, waiting. Finally, Eva spoke. Sir, I'll accept the assignment on one condition. The colonel raised an eyebrow. Name it. I fly alone. No wingman, no permanent team. I work the missions you give me, but I do it my way with my own methods. And when I decide I'm done, when I decide I can't carry this anymore, you let me walk away. No argument, no pressure, no questioning my commitment or dedication. The colonel considered this. That's a significant amount of autonomy you're requesting. Yes, sir, but it's the only way I'll do it. The officers in the room exchanged glances. Major Reynolds spoke up. Sir, if I may, Lieutenant Constantine just demonstrated exactly why that autonomy makes sense. The colonel studied Eva for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. Agreed. You'll operate independently with direct tasking from this command. You'll have priority access to intelligence, unrestricted ordnance authorization, and command authority over supporting assets when needed. When you decide you're done, you're done. He extended his hand across the briefing table. Eva stood and shook it, feeling the finality of the commitment. The colonel released her hand and gestured to a captain sitting at the side of the room. Captain Morrison will be your intelligence liaison. He'll brief you on current taskings and provide operational updates. Your first mission briefing is scheduled for 600 tomorrow. The briefing concluded. Officers filed out, some stopping to introduce themselves to Eva, others simply nodding respectfully as they passed. Crossed some invisible threshold, moved from anonymous lieutenant to someone whose name carried weight and recognition. When the room had mostly cleared, Major Reynolds approached. "You know what you just signed up for?" Eva smiled faintly. "Same thing I've been doing for 25 years, just with better administrative support this time." Reynolds laughed. "Fair point." He grew more serious. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Those Marines you saved yesterday, they're already telling stories. By tomorrow, everyone on this base will know who you are. By next week, everyone in theater will know. You're going to become something of a legend." Eva grimaced. "I never wanted that." "I know, but that's what happens when you do extraordinary things. People notice." He paused, then added, "Webb came to see me earlier, asked to be reassigned to whatever unit supports your operations, wants to volunteer as ground coordination." Eva was surprised. He said that. His exact words were that he wanted a chance to learn from the best, that after seeing what you did yesterday, he realized how little he actually knows about what it means to be a warrior. Reynolds smiled. "I told him I'd pass along the request. Thought you should know." Eva spent the rest of the evening in her quarters, reviewing intelligence reports on Khalid Nazari and his organization. The picture that emerged was troubling. Nazari had been a competent officer in the Afghan National Army before defecting to the insurgency 2 years prior. He'd taken his training, his tactical knowledge, and his understanding of Western military doctrine and turned it against his former allies. His fighters didn't operate like typical insurgents. They used proper infantry tactics, established effective command and control, maintained discipline under fire. The ambush of Tombstone's convoy showed signs of sophisticated planning and preparation. Captain Morrison knocked on her door at 2200 hours. Eva let him in. Morrison was young, maybe 30, with the intense focus of an intelligence officer who took his work seriously. He carried a laptop and a classified briefing folder. "Lieutenant Constantin, I wanted to provide a more detailed brief on tomorrow's mission before the formal briefing." Eva gestured to a chair. "Go ahead." Morrison opened his laptop and brought up a satellite image. "We've identified a compound in the Sangin district that intelligence suggests is being used as a training facility. Thermal imaging shows approximately 40 to 50 personnel on site, with activity patterns consistent with organized military training. The compound is well defended with prepared fighting positions and what appears to be anti-aircraft weapons." He zoomed in on the image. "The mission is a reconnaissance and strike package. You'll conduct an overflight, confirm the target, and if verified, you're cleared to engage. The goal is to disrupt their training operations and degrade their combat effectiveness before they deploy." Eva studied the imagery. The compound was isolated, surrounded by open terrain that would make approach difficult. But the A-10 excelled at exactly this kind of mission. Supporting assets, Morrison pulled up another file. "You'll have a Predator drone providing overwatch and targeting data. If you encounter significant air defense, we can vector in F-16s for SEAD strikes, but command is hopping. You can handle this independently." Eva nodded. "Ordnance package. Standard mixed load. Mavericks, Hydra rockets, full gun load. We're not expecting armor, so the focus is anti-personnel and structural destruction." Eva spent an hour with Morrison going over every detail of the mission: ingress routes, egress options, communication frequencies, rules of engagement, collateral damage restrictions. By the time Morrison left, Eva had the mission memorized, visualized, mentally rehearsed from takeoff to landing. She tried to sleep but managed only a few hours of restless dozing. At 500, she gave up and went for a run around the FOB perimeter. The physical exertion helped quiet her mind, let her focus on breath and movement rather than the mission ahead. She returned to her quarters, showered, dressed, and arrived at the operations building at 5:45. The formal briefing at 600 added nothing Morrison hadn't already told her. Eva listened, acknowledged her tasking, and headed for the flight line. The sun was just rising as she approached the A-10. Ground crew had already completed pre-flight checks. The ordnance was loaded, the fuel tanks topped off. One of the crew chiefs, a grizzled sergeant with 20 years of experience visible in his weathered face, approached Eva. "Ma'am, aircraft is ready. We heard what you did yesterday. Want you to know we checked every inch of this bird 3 times. She'll bring you home." Eva appreciated the sentiment. "Thank you, Sergeant. Good work." She climbed into the cockpit and began her pre-flight ritual. Each switch, each gauge, each system checked and verified. She was thorough because thoroughness kept you alive. At 6:45, she received clearance for takeoff. The rolled down the runway and lifted into the morning sky. Eva climbed to 15,000 feet and turned toward Sangin District. The landscape below transformed as she flew, green river valleys giving way to brown desert and rocky mountains. The terrain was harsh and unforgiving, beautiful in its severity. Eva checked in with the Predator drone already on station over the target area. The drone operator confirmed thermal signatures consistent with the intelligence brief. Approximately 45 personnel, organized activity patterns, defensive positions manned. Reaper, this is Pale Horse. Target appears valid for engagement. No civilian signatures detected in immediate area. Eva descended to 10,000 feet, beginning her approach. She armed her weapons systems, running through combat checklists with automatic precision. Pale Horse Reaper, I have visual on target compound, commencing attack run. Eva rolled the A-10 into a shallow dive, bringing the compound into her targeting reticle. The buildings were typical Afghan construction mud brick walls, flat roofs, arranged in a rough square around a central courtyard. Through her targeting pod, she could see personnel moving in the courtyard, conducting what looked like weapons training. She selected a Maverick missile and locked onto the largest structure, what intelligence had identified as the main barracks. Pale Horse, Reaper engaging. She pressed the trigger. The Maverick separated from the rail and streaked downward, its guidance system tracking perfectly. 3 seconds later, the building exploded, walls collapsing inward, roof lifting up before crashing down. Personnel in the courtyard scattered, running for defensive positions. Eva came around for a second pass, targeting the vehicles parked outside the compound. 2 technicals with mounted weapons, 3 trucks that could be used for transport or escape. She fired again, her second Maverick destroying both technicals in a single blast that threw burning debris across 50 meters. Return fire started immediately. Heavy machine guns, tracers arcing up toward her position. Eva climbed, gaining altitude while planning her next approach. The defenders were reacting faster than typical insurgents, showing training and discipline. Eva selected her Hydra rocket pods and dove again, this time targeting the defensive positions along the compound walls. Rockets rippled from the pods in pairs, impacting along the perimeter in a rolling wave of explosions. The defensive fire slackened. Eva triggered the GAU-8, walking rounds through the remaining